Setting up Windows 365 should be straightforward, but most IT admins hit the same three walls. Licensing confusion, provisioning policies that just don't apply, and then Intune configurations that just don't stick. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire setup process from zero to a working Cloud PC. We're going to talk about licensing. We're going to go through all the different licensing models that Windows 365 gives you. We're going to talk about the provisioning policies. So I'm going to walk you through the whole provisioning process. And then we're going to talk about Intune policies. How do we manage these devices via Intune? And then we'll show you the first logging experience. We're going to show you everything. And I'll show you the mistakes that to avoid each step of the way as well, so you don't waste hours and hours of troubleshooting. All right, let's get into it. And if you're new to the channel, then welcome. This is the Virtual Mac YouTube channel. And on this channel, we review the latest news on Azure Virtual Desktop, Intune, Nerdio, Windows 365, and much, much more. So the first thing we need to do is to buy and assign some Windows 365 licenses. Okay, you can create your provisioning policies and get all the configuration in place, but nothing will actually provision until you actually have some licenses assigned. So what we'll do now, we'll go into the portal and then we'll actually assign some licenses that have already got purchased, but the process for buying the licenses is exactly the same as well. All right, so let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I'm in the admin portal. This is where we would purchase our licenses. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to licenses. Yeah, so here you can see if you've got any existing licenses applied. So you can see here, I've already got some Windows 365 licenses that I've got. Okay, and you can see here that it's showing that I've got 3 available licenses. So they're available to assign to 3 people. Okay. Now, if I wanted to buy more licenses, I'll show you where we would do that as well. So if I go to your products and then we go to add more products, okay, and then we can go down here and we can see Windows 365. Now, probably worth explaining the differences between these licenses because there are a couple of different Windows 365 licenses available. So let me just select Windows 365. We've got Windows 365 Enterprise. We've got Windows 365 Business, and then we've got Windows 365 Frontline. So let me just very quickly explain what the differences between those licenses are. So Windows 365 Business is designed for smaller organizations. So it's a straightforward self-service cloud PCs aimed at businesses with up to 300 users, right? So that's the limit. So if you've got more than 300 users, it won't let you assign any more licenses. Now, the benefit that you get for Windows 365 for Business, it doesn't require any more Microsoft licenses, right? So with Windows 365 Enterprise, you need to have an Azure subscription or Intune licenses to get started. With the Windows 365 for Business, you don't even need an Azure subscription. So if you want to essentially just assign a desktop to a person who just wants the basic Office apps, they don't need any like Intune management or they don't need any advanced identity, then Windows 365 for Business is definitely the one to go for. Okay, so that's the cheapest option. And if you're a small business, 50 users, and you don't need any advanced management, then that's definitely the one to go for. Windows 365 Enterprise is the full flat IT admin grade edition. That's right. There's no user limit on that. It has deep integration with Microsoft Intune, conditional access policies and endpoint security policies and stuff. If you're a company with more than a couple of hundred users, or you're going to be a couple of hundred people using Windows 365, then you definitely want to look at the Windows 365 Enterprise license. Windows 365 Frontline is the new kid on the block. So this is Microsoft Cost Optimized Cloud PC Edition, built specifically for workers who don't need a persistent, always-on cloud PC. So that's the words in the title, frontline workers. So the key concept is that a single Windows 365 Frontline license covers multiple users on a sharing, rotating basis because not all shift workers are using a PC at the same time. And to add complications a bit further, we've now got Windows 365 shared and Windows 365 for cloud apps as well. Okay, but they're the core 3 different licensing models that you need for Windows 365. Okay, all right, let's go back over to the portal. Now you know a bit more about that. You can have these different licenses here. So for example, if I click on like Windows 365 Enterprise, what that will do, it will show me the different SKU models that I've got available, right? So I can click on the 2 CPU, 8 gigs of RAM, which is like £35 a month. So let's click on, I don't know, just go here. But you can, I mean, to be honest with you, minimum spec, most people are going to go for 4 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, which is like £57 a month. 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM is a bit limiting, I'd say. But hey, whatever you need in your environment. If I wanted to go for like this one here, so 4 CPUs, 16 gigs, I can go into there. And then I just select how many licenses that I want to buy. So if I wanted to buy like 500 licenses, I just click on that, and that will tell me the amount of money that I'll be paying for that as well. Okay, so that's how you purchase your licenses. Once you've basically gone through and purchased those licenses, what you would then do is, if you go to licenses, you see the licenses pop up here. Okay, and now what we then need to do, we essentially need to assign the licenses. Now this is also a common mistake which people make as well, and I made it when I first started as well. We can assign the licenses to a user or a group. Okay, so you definitely don't want to assign them on a per user basis. The reason being is because if you did that, then each time that you had to come in to assign a license, you'd have to come into this portal and then add the user to directly to here, right? Which is obviously not really a good thing. What we recommend you do is you basically assign the users to a group. So assign the licenses to a group, okay? And that enables you then just to go into Entra ID and then just add the user into that group when you want to provision a Cloud PC for them, right? So let's go ahead and do that now. I've got 3 licenses that I've got available. Okay, so if I go to assign licenses, I'm going to go to here. So to users or groups in an organization, maximum 20 at a time. So I'm going to search for a name. So I've pre-created this group. So Windows 5 for CPU, right? So that's an Entra ID group which I've got and created previously. So that's showing me I'm assigning that 4 CPU license. Now you can split this out as much as you want to. You can create separate groups for marketing, sales, for example, or you can do it on a per CPU basis. So it's asking me to select the subscription which I want to assign. So I want to assign those licenses. So I'm going to click assign licenses. Okay, so that means that my license has now been assigned to that group. Okay. And so if I go back down here, click that close button, go down here, and then you'll see, there you go, it's showing a license type of a group. Okay, so you just refresh that. There you go. Okay, so what we now need to do, we now need to go and basically create what we call a provisioning policy. And that provisioning policy is how I map the license to what I want it to create, right? What type of VM, what image, that type of thing. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so for this section, we're going to use the Intune portal, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and create a provisioning policy, and we're going to map that provisioning policy to the group that we just assigned the licenses to. Okay, so let's go ahead into the portal. Now, for this one, we actually use the Intune portal. This is where we essentially manage Windows 365 for the enterprise from. So I'm just going to go ahead and click into there. So if I go into here, and then if I go into devices, okay, and then I click on device onboarding and then Windows 365. So this is essentially where we're managing the Windows 365. All the applications and stuff, they're still managed by native Intune. So, but this specific section here is for the provisioning of Windows 365. Okay, the first thing that we need to do, we need to create a provisioning policy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to select provisioning policies. So you can see I've already got a few others which I was testing with. And now we need to create a provisioning policy. Okay, so I'm just going to go and click create policy. Let's call this sales desktops, for example. Sales desktops. Okay, so now we need to make a decision about experiences. So access a full Cloud PC desktop or access only apps which run in the cloud. So the first decision point that we need to make is, do you want each user to have a full desktop, or do you just want them to run cloud apps? So what is cloud apps? So cloud apps is a new capability where the users don't need a full dedicated desktop. They can just have the ability to launch the application itself, right? So it doesn't require a dedicated desktop for each user. It requires a Frontline license, but it essentially means that you can share more users with your licenses, right? Because the license is only in use when the user's launching that application. So rather than just being sat at a desktop all day, for example, they may only use the application for, I don't know, 2 hours a day, which means they're only using up that Frontline license for only 2 hours a day. Rather than for giving them a full desktop, they may just sit on the desktop all day. So it can be a lot more cost effective to use that if you are only giving them access to a desktop just to launch one application. If the users need to access like a couple of applications, like maybe Office, Word, Excel, and then a landing business application, then it makes more sense to give the user a full desktop. So the next decision after that is, do we want to go enterprise or do we need to do a frontline? And so enterprise, which means it's a one-to-one user, it's a one-to-one mapping. Okay. The frontline license means I have the ability to apply a license for up to 3 users. Okay, but those users can't use that desktop concurrently, right? They can only use it different times of the day. So if you've got shift patterns, maybe a hospital, a fire service workers, or something like that, where within a 24-hour period, 3 separate people are using that desktop, then that also may be more economical. So instead of having to buy 3 licenses, you'd buy 1 frontline license and then share that 1 frontline license amongst 3 different people, right? So that could work out a bit cheaper for you as well. Frontline licenses are slightly more expensive than an enterprise license, obviously, but you need to work out the cost dynamics to see, okay, is this worth it? And it normally is based on the user concurrent ratio, right? That's how we normally gauge the frontline license cost. But most customers these days are just using the enterprise licenses, and because it means that the user gets their own dedicated license PC that's available at all times. So once you've made those decisions, we can now go on to the next decision point, which is, what identity do I need to do? Okay. Again, this would be very specific for your environment. So we've got 2 types of identity. We can have Entra ID Join or hybrid Microsoft Entra ID Join. So Entra ID Join basically means that the user is a member of Entra ID, and we're going to join the Windows 365 device straight to Entra ID. And so no Active Directory involvement at all. We're just going to add it straight to Entra ID. You can sync the user from Active Directory to Entra ID if you wanted to, but if you don't need any Active Directory involvement on the actual Windows 365 device itself, then you can just pick Microsoft Entra ID Join. Okay, so just to reiterate, that's joining Entra ID, and the user also needs to be in Entra ID as well. The other selection that we've got is hybrid Microsoft Entra ID Join. So what is this? So hybrid Entra ID Join is where we essentially join the machine to, or the Windows 365 device to Active Directory. Okay. And then what essentially happens then is you would sync your Active Directory to Entra ID. A middle ground that companies use if they're not ready for full Entra ID Join and they want to have the best of both worlds, they need access to on-prem Active Directory resources using Kerberos, they would select Microsoft Hybrid Entra ID Join. And you see that it's asking me for Azure network connection. And the reason why it needs that Azure network connection is because it needs a connectivity to Active Directory. Okay, so if you were to pick the hybrid Entra ID Join, then you need to make sure that you have a domain controller, okay, which is accessible from this Azure network connection. So that's normally within your Azure subscription, and you have a domain controller running inside that Azure subscription, and then the VNet that you select with this Azure network connection would be the one that this Windows 365 device is using to talk to Active Directory. Okay, so if you do need your Windows 365 devices joined to Active Directory, then you need this Azure network connection set up, and you need to select this hybrid Microsoft Entra ID Join. Okay, but we're going to keep this simple, so we're going to select Entra ID Join. Okay, so the next decision point that you've got is around the Microsoft hosted network or Azure network connection. What are these? So the Microsoft hosted network is a network which is managed by Microsoft. Okay, you don't have control over it. Microsoft completely manage that network. The Azure network connection is a network which you manage. Okay, now what the decision point for this is, if you don't require access to any company resources that you host internally, then you can choose the Microsoft hosted network. So the Microsoft hosted network by default will just give you access to just the internet, essentially. Okay, so if you've got any resources within your own internal network, you won't have access to those, right? But what the recommendation that Microsoft do, especially in larger enterprise environments, is you'd use the Microsoft hosted network and then you use a VPN, right? So you use the Microsoft hosted VPN service if you want to, or you can use your own VPN service to then connect to those desktops, right? Now, what does that give you? That basically means that you don't have a network to manage, right, in the cloud, because Microsoft manages it for you. So you just need to install a VPN client on that desktop, okay? And then you can use the VPN to connect to your internal network. So that saves a bit of complication. The other alternative is to use the Azure network connection. So again, what this will do, if you've got a VNet or a subnet inside your Azure subscription, point it at this, and then essentially that it will use that network. Okay, so if you've got an ExpressVPN connection, or if you've got a site-to-site VPN running within your environment, then this is the one that you select, right? Because that means that that Windows 365 device will then have access to your internal network. Whereas if we hit Microsoft hosted network, that network is a public network which is essentially managed by Microsoft, right? You won't have access to any of your internal resources. Okay, so again, for simplicity, here we're going to select Microsoft hosted network. Okay, so geography, here's where you select your region. So I'm going to select Europe. So select Europe, and then within there, you can just go in here and you can select where you want those desktops to be provisioned as well. Okay, so what Microsoft will do, though, will kind of optimize it. You can see that it's giving me a few options of where I want my desktop to be. I want my desktop in UK South. So maybe for data sovereignty reasons, you need to make sure that your desktop is in a certain region. So what I'm going to do is I'm unselect those, and I'm going to select UK South, right? Because that's where I want my desktop to be. Okay, so we're going to select next. So there we go. And then we're going to select Microsoft single sign-on. So this means that if I'm logged on to my client using my same credentials that I'm accessing the desktop from, and it won't re-authenticate me. It will just use those local credentials. So if your users do log on to the device where they're accessing the Windows 365 desktop from using the same account, then it will just automatically put them through. So always recommend enabling this as well. Okay. All right. So we've got that. Next decision point, what image do we want to use? We can have used a gallery image, right? So this is just the default Microsoft images that they provisioned. You can see the latest one is like Windows 11 Enterprise with 25H2 and with the latest Microsoft M365 applications on there as well. The other option that you've got is to select your own image. So if you have a custom image that you have and you got your own applications on there, you can essentially use your own custom image with your own applications on there. When would you use that? So you'd probably need to use that if you needed to ensure that the applications were installed on the image like right from day one, just to make sure that we have all the applications on there as soon as that desktop is revisions. Okay, but to be honest with you, most customers use the gallery image and then just layer the applications on top using Intune, and that means that they don't have to worry about managing a separate image or updating a separate image, for example. Okay, so now we select next. So we go to the configuration. So here we can select our language, right? So I can select my different language. So again, if you're provisioning different users throughout the world, then you probably want to create a different provisioning policy for those users and then select the language here. All right, so I'm going to select United Kingdom, but if I was in Germany, for example, I can just select German, and that means that the language of that desktop will be that within that relevant language. Okay, so I'm going to select English United Kingdom. Custom naming template. So by default, it will be called CPC and with a random number on the end. But you can have a custom name template in there as well that follows a specific naming format. So within your enterprise, if you do have a specific naming convention, then you put it in here. Again, for simplicity, we're just going to leave this as the default. Now, what this is Windows Autopilot Preview. So this is a new feature which is in public preview. And what we can do, we can actually plug in Windows 365 into Autopilot, right? And what does this mean? This means basically that the applications or whatever configurations you've got configured within that Autopilot will automatically be put into that desktop, right? And then that desktop won't actually be made available to the user. Everything's deployed, essentially, right? So it just makes the user experience a bit better. So historically, the user may have to wait for those applications to be deployed onto that desktop. So imagine having a brand new desktop and you're like, where's all my applications? Where's all my configuration settings? This kind of fixes that problem because it means that the applications are there from day one, essentially. And then we can also sign up for the Windows Auto Patch as well, right? So if you've got Auto Patch configured, you can then use that. So I'm going to select none, again, to keep it simple. But Maybe that's a separate video, but yeah, if you have auto patch configured, you can set that up here as well. All right, so that's the configuration settings. As you can see, quite a lot to think about there, right? It's not as simple as you think it would be. So there's a couple of things that you need to think about from a design perspective. Am I going to use autopilot? What's my naming convention? Am I doing Active Directory join? Am I not doing Active Directory join? What region am I going to be in? Quite a lot there to sort of think about before you just go ahead and deploy those desktops. Right. Okay, so now we've got scope tags. So if you do use scope tags from an admin perspective, you can apply those here as well. Assignments. So here's the group. So this is where we assigned the group to earlier, right? You remember the licenses stuff that we just did? And then from here, I'm going to select this group here. So Windows 365 for CPU. Okay, so that's the one that we chose before. So I'm going to assign that there. And that basically means we're mapping this provisioning policy to the group. Okay, so every time I add a user to this group, it means they will consume one license, and then also it means that a desktop will be provisioned within UK South, ready for that user to use. So I'm going to select next. So we're creating a provisioning policy called sales desktop. We're going to access a full Cloud PC desktop using enterprise license. We're going to do Entra ID Join. Okay, this is going to be within UK South. We're going to use the Windows 11 M365 image, so we're going to have access to all the Office applications, and then we are not going to use the device name template, and we're not going to set any scope tags, and we're going to use this license SKU for it as well. Okay, so I'm then going to click on the create button. So what's basically going to happen then, that's going to create my provisioning policy. Okay, now, for now, that's it, right? Because all we've done is we create the provisioning policy baseline, because there's no users of that group inside that group, which means it's not going to do anything. Okay, so it's going to monitor that group, and as soon as we assign people to that group, it will then kick off and then start provisioning a Cloud PC. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll go ahead, we'll head over into Entra ID portal, we'll add a user to that group, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll add the user to the group, and then hopefully what we'll see is we'll see the provisioning policy kick in, and then it should start provisioning a desktop for that user. So let's go and do that now. All right, so I'm in the Azure portal, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to groups, and then I'm going to go to total groups, and then I'm going to find the group that we used within the provisioning policy. So that's Windows 365 for CPU. Okay, so this is here, and then go to manage, and then members, and then I'm going to click add members. Okay, so I've got a test user account that I'm using, so I'm going to go to test user 1, a version. Okay, so that's the user that we're going to use. Select. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we'll monitor the provisioning policy just to see what happens. Okay, we are back. So as you can see here, we have a status of not provisioned, and it's in a provisioning status, right? So that's been provisioned to that test user 1, and that shows that it started provisioning process. So yeah, it'll take about an hour. So I'll be back shortly when that's finished provisioning. Right, so how do we manage these Windows 365 devices? So they are registered in Intune, right? So any application deployments or configuration settings, you do that within the Intune portal. So what we'll do now is I'll just go into the Intune portal, and then I'll show you how to assign that to either the user or the device. Now, one quick tip I've got is that if you want to assign something to all the Cloud PCs, maybe there's something specific that you want for those devices, you can actually set up a dynamic group. Right, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll show you how to do that now. So if I go over into groups, and go to all groups, okay, what we'll do is we'll set up a new group, and we'll basically create this group as dynamic, right? So I'm going to call this all Windows 365 Cloud. Okay, so this group will contain all my Windows 365 devices. Okay, and then we'll click on membership type. Now you can either use dynamic user or dynamic device. So for this one, because we're trying to catch all the devices, we'll select dynamic device. Okay, and then we're going to add a dynamic query. So what I can do here is I can choose my property. So that's going to be display name. Okay, and it's going to be begins with. So I'm just going to select. I'm going to select starts with, and then CPC, because the default name is CPC. Okay, I'm going to click add expression. Now, what we can do to validate that, just to make sure that that's working okay, I can select validate rules. I click add devices, and then I can select one of the existing Cloud PC devices which I've got in my environment. So I click select, and you can see there status view details. That means, yep, okay, we're good to go there as well. Right. So what I'm going to do is we're going to save that. Okay. So now, for example, if I wanted to deploy an application to all my devices, all I need to do is to click into apps. Okay. And I've got some applications which I should already have in here. So if I wanted to deploy, say, Adobe Acrobat and to all of my Windows 365 devices, or any line of business application which I've got configured, I can just click into the Intune portal, click on apps, and I go to Windows, and then I select any of my existing applications. So here I've got Adobe Acrobat Reader. Edit that application and just add the dynamic group that we just added in there. So if I go into my assignments, and click on edit, and then I click on add group. Then I just select my Windows 365 devices, so you can see that there, and that will then pick up that dynamic group. Click select, and then what will then happen is when that desktop is built, it will see that I've got this assigned, and then it will deploy that application to that group as well. So what about security settings? Exactly the same way as you would do with a normal Windows 365 device or any physical device. I just go into the devices, go to Windows, okay, and then I'd go to, say, configuration or compliance policies. So let's go to configuration, for example. I'm going to click create, select new policy, select Windows 10 or later, set the profile, which is going to be the settings catalog. I click create, and then I'm going to put test sales security settings, for example. Security settings. Okay, these are the security settings for the sales team. Okay, select that, select next, and then we get our settings which we want to apply. So maybe we go to the admin. I want to lock down the control panel. And for example, just go to admin programs. I want to hide new programs. I want to hide components. I want to hide change admin programs. I want to hide all these. So just lock it down, remove admin programs, remove support information. There you go. So they'll do just as default. Select next. I don't want any scope tabs and assignments. So here's where we can either set this at the device or we can set it at the user, right? And here I'm going to select the group which I created earlier, which contains the user. So sales users. I'm going to select that. Select next. And then we're going to click on and create. So that should be essentially hide and remove Windows components or change and remove programs. Okay. Click create. So that policy is then created. So essentially what should happen now is we've done two things. We've deployed an application and we deployed some lockdown settings. So when the user logs onto that Windows 365 device, they should have those settings applied. All right. So we'll wait for the provisioning policy to kick in. We'll wait for that desktop to be created, and then we'll go and check that and then log in with the user. Okay, we're back. Desktop's finished provisioning. Not really needs a ride. For some reason, it failed a few times. So let me just take you over to the screen so you can see. So you can see here, it said failed. Random error message. I have no idea what that meant. I've retried it a few times. It's still failing. I think it's something to do with my user account because I just tried it with a separate user account and it worked perfectly fine. It has taken a few hours, more than expected. So you can see here, basically, this desktop kicked off. It did take about an hour to create the desktop. So what we'll do now is we'll show you how you actually connect your Windows 365 desktop using the Windows app. All right. So let's go and do that now. So I've launched the Windows app. The Windows app is what you use to access your Windows 365 desktops, and also the same app that's actually use your Azure Virtual Desktop sessions as well. So what we'll do is when you finish launch it, you just see this screen here. I've got no favorites set up or configured, but if I wanted to, I can do that. So if we just click on devices, and we can see this sales desktop. So this is the desktop which we provisioned. Okay, so you can see cloud only. That's the user account that I'm using. So to launch it, we just select that, and that in theory should launch us straight into the desktop. Let's see what happens here. Okay, it's asking me for my password. Okay, so it's asking me for my MFA authentication as well, which is good. So this is what you see now is what you'll get when you enable single sign-on. So this is this one-time only action that you'll see, and then it'll reset every 30 days. But it just means that every log on from now on, it shouldn't authenticate me. It just should let me go straight in. Okay, so let me just authenticate there. And there we are. We are now logging into our Cloud PC desktop. Okay. And there we have it. We now have our desktop. Now, it will take Intune a bit of time to deliver the application configuration settings and also the Adobe Acrobat Reader. Normally 15-20 minutes, sometimes like 5 to 10 minutes, depends on how fast Intune's been that day. But yeah, we now have the Cloud PC desktop and that the user is now able to use and to access all their applications and emails and SharePoints and what have you. So that's fully ready to go. Okay, there you have it. That's how you provision a Cloud PC from beginning to end. As mentioned, I did have a bit of a hiccup, but it normally takes about an hour to get up and running. So you can be up and running with a sort of Cloud PC desktop, maybe within an hour and a half from beginning to end, which is quite impressive. The only thing which I do not like about Cloud PCs compared to Azure Virtual Desktop, for example, is number one, you have no control. For example, when my provisioning policy was failing, I have no idea why. It was a random error message, and there's nothing I can do about that. And the second, it takes a bit longer. If I provision a desktop within my Azure Virtual Desktop, it takes 15 minutes. Whereas, obviously, you saw here, like Cloud PC desktops generally take about an hour. Yeah, so that's it from this kind of start to finish from Windows 365.